Hello there, welcome to Lesson 7. So today's lesson is on conducting research, which is the next step in the process we began last time. So in the last lecture, we talked about what the web article assignment is, and hopefully by the end of that lecture, by the time you did your discussion board post, you were able to come up with, at least right now, a rough idea of what you want to write on. At least a text you want to write about, a movie, a film, a song, whatever that is. And then hopefully also the cultural issue or trend that you want to discuss um, in relation to that text. So if you figure out what those things are, the next step then is to begin doing some research. So this assignment is probably a little bit different than other assignments you've done in the past with research because you're writing about popular culture. But the principles of research are really the same. You're not going to do this research that much differently than if you were writing on a more traditionally academic type of topic. And so the principles you learn in this lesson, ideally, hopefully you can apply those to other classes. And what I'm going to do here is real briefly, in the first part, go over kind of the principles of research. Then the second part of the lecture will be the longest, and there I'm actually going to do a sample search for some resources and show you how best to find sources. And then in the final section, I'll go over how you could take those sources and then from reading about them, come up with an actual thesis statement for your paper, for your web article. And again, I'll have an example of that from the example research I've done. That's really the goal here is you've got a topic now. This next step is research. The purpose of research is learning more about that topic before you formulate a thesis. And then finally, once you've learned about that information, synthesize that information, then formulating your own unique opinion about the subject. So that's what we're going to go through here in this lecture. So this first part, like I said, will be the principles of research. These 4 bullet points I'm going to go through here are ones we covered in lesson 4 when we were talking about developing a thesis statement. They apply anytime you're writing a paper. Sometimes the research process will be more involved than others. For that last paper, I gave you the sources, so you didn't really have to find sources. You had to synthesize them and then develop your argument. Here, we're not skipping that step this time. This time you'll be finding the sources, but once you find them, you'll synthesize them and come up with your argument. So you begin by stating your topic as a question. So you begin with a research question. You have a text, you have a cultural trend or issue you want to talk about. What do you ultimately want to learn? That's where you start, by stating what you want to learn. Turn your question into a position. So you'll do the research, you'll synthesize the sources you find, and then you'll turn your question into a position when you go to write the paper and you have a thesis. You'll narrow your position, you'll make it more specific. You'll probably start to formulate an opinion as you research, after you've done some of the research and some of the reading. When you go to write your paper, though, you want your thesis to be as specific as possible. And finally, qualify your thesis. Add in those terms that make it less of a sweeping claim and a very specific claim. So for this project, for this example, we'll really be focusing on the first 2. Coming up with a research question, synthesizing the information you find, really finding that information and then synthesizing it, and then finally turning your question into a position. Numbers 3 and 4 can come when you go to write the actual paper in a couple of weeks. So I wanted to do kind of a sample research question here to show you what a research question should look like. That'd be one reason. And then 2, also so that we have a research question so we can do a sample search here and I can show you, how to actually conduct your search, how to find the sources. So the topic I've chosen is the film Black Panther. And I'm curious what this film has to say about race, because it's the first Marvel superhero film with a black protagonist. And Marvel is something I'm really interested in. I love comic books. I loved reading Black Panther comics when I was younger, and Marvel's become huge. It's not just nerds like me who are into Marvel anymore. It's become popular in the mainstream. And so I want to learn more about Black Panther, but I'm very curious what critics and scholars think about the film's portrayal of race, since it's not only the first black Marvel superhero, but also first predominantly black cast in a major blockbuster superhero film. So I'm really curious about these two things, what the connection is. And so your research question can be fairly general. You're hoping to learn more as you go. So it's okay if the research question is general. And this is about as general as it gets. I basically have my text I'm interested in, the film Black Panther, which is a movie I love, like I said a minute ago, and then my cultural trend or phenomenon or issue, which is race relations. So I basically have just kind of a very generic question here that is asking what's the relationship between my text and my topic. All right, so we're on to the example. Like I said, that first part was very quick because I'm going to spend a lot of time showing you how I found my sources on Black Panther, again, as an example for how you can find your own sources. You can apply these same steps I'm about to do when you do your own search for research. So I just wanted to kind of refresh us with the question. What does the film Black Panther have to say about race? And the reason I mention the question again is you don't want to type the question into a search engine. I should have added a slide showing what happens, but if you type your question, the whole question, if I were to type into Google, what does the film Black Panther have to say about race? One of two things would happen. Either I'd get back millions and millions of results, way too many results, or I'd get back like 0 results. So what you want to do is extrapolate key terms from the research question. So look at your question and what are some key terms or phrases you would type in. So these are the ones I came up with. Black Panther plus Marvel plus race. I put Black Panther in quotation marks because I wanted to find all those words together. I don't want it to find every article with the word black in it because that'd be millions of articles. And I don't want it to find every article with the word panther in it because that'd probably not as many as just the word black, but probably still a lot of articles out there on panthers. I'm not really interested in the jungle cat. I am, but not as much as the film. Little joke there. Anyway, so if you put quotations around something, it'll only find articles that have both those words in it together. And then the plus sign means these are additional terms I'm searching for. So I put the term Marvel, again, because I'm looking for the film. There's the group of the political group called the Black Panthers. I don't really need information on them. And then finally, race. That's the most obvious one here because that's my concept I'm searching for, my topic. I want to know what Black Panther says about race. So those two terms are essential. Your terms may be less obvious than these, and there might be other terms you could plug in instead. You can also add more terms if you get too many results. If I get too many results for this, I could put in race relations or something like that to try to narrow it. But let's go ahead and do the search. Forgot one more thing. We're going to search for scholarly articles. And for that, you want to begin with the EW library guide. So on the next slide, I'll show you what the guide is. But basically, we have a librarian here at EW who has developed a web page solely devoted to helping you find resources just for this paper. It's a library guide for finding sources on pop culture, for researching pop culture. So unlike other library guides, it focuses specifically on pop culture. And the EW library is a great place to begin looking for sources. Now, you're probably not going to be able to find every source there, especially for a paper like this, but again, it's a great place to start. And so I'm going to show you how to search using the EW library. And again, hopefully these principles we'll go over here will be helpful to you in future classes, because you'll probably be required to find much more scholarly things for other classes, and you'll really need the library to do that. So I'm going to find 3 different sources. If you look at the prompt for your paper, you'll see that you're required to have 3 sources total. So I'm going to find 3 different types of sources. You don't have to have 3 different types of sources. You just have to have 3 sources. They can be any type of source. But I'm going to, just for the sake of variety, showing you the different options out there for my example, I'm going to find 3 different sources. The only requirement is that your sources be credible. And that's what the next lecture, lecture 8, will be about. But basically, you want to spend some time looking at these sources and deciding if the information they present is reliable and credible. The best way to do is by looking at that. Looking at the evidence, I mean. How do they support their argument? Hopefully you should be an expert on whatever text you've chosen. You should be kind of passionate about it. So you should know by reading the article if it's a legitimate article or not. I love the movie Black Panther. I love Marvel Comics. I've seen the movie a couple of times. I've read lots of Black Panther comics. So if what an article is saying doesn't make sense, I'm going to know. So that's kind of what you want to distinguish here. And you don't have to use the articles you find here in your paper. You can change them later on if you need to. So that's why we don't have time to talk about credibility in this lecture. So lecture 8, we'll talk about credibility. But the first source I'm going to find is a scholarly one, and I'm going to use the EW library to do that because the library is the best place to find scholarly sources. So if you have another class that does require scholarly sources, go to the library, and the librarians there are very helpful if you have any issues. So here's the first step is to go to the research guide. So you can see English 101, Researching Pop Culture, the picture of the librarian down there who developed this. In most classes, we'll have a research guide. Not all of them, but a lot of them. Or a department will, say the history department, for instance. English, we really like research, so we have research guides for most of our classes in English. I have the link to this several places in the Canvas site, but you can also just find it by going to ew.edu/library, clicking on research guides. So you can see it lists a number of sources here for you to look for your information. EBSCOhost, ProQuest, JSTOR, and Google Scholar are the 4 most wide-ranging sources. Databases, excuse me. These are databases. What databases are collections of journals that have tons of journal articles in them. And part of your tuition that goes to the library pays for these, so they're not technically free, but you don't have to pay anything to access them. You've already paid for these with your tuition. And EBSCOhost, ProQuest, and JSTOR are the 3, like I said, most general ones. You can find articles on almost any subject using these, whereas there are also subject-specific databases. Our library currently doesn't really have a pop culture database, so we're using the 3 most general ones for our search because we can find information on almost anything there. And then Google Scholar is a good one for the same reasons, but you don't have to have a library account at EW to access that. So for our second source, we'll use Google Scholar. For the first source, I'm going to use EBSCOhost because it has the most content of those 3 at the top there. And so what I'm going to do now is basically just the next portion of this lecture will be all screenshots, and I'm going to take you fairly quickly through the search I did. So what I did right here is click on EBSCOhost. And it'll take you to this page. I'm not sure why. It should take you directly there. But just click on Academic Search Complete. EBSCOhost has a number of different databases. Academic Search Complete is the most wide-ranging one. So for some reason it takes you here, but just click on Academic Search Complete. Here's what the page looks like once you get to, so you can see both EBSCOhost and Academic Search Complete. So here's what the page looks like when you get there. I'm going to start just by typing Black Panther. I'm not going to type Marvel or Race here because Black Panther just came out earlier this year, 2018. So there might not be a lot of articles that people have written on it yet. If I get too many articles, then I can add in Marvel and Race later on. A lot of articles do come up. I've tried to highlight the important portions on these screenshots. So you can see that 1,250 articles come up. That's way too many. You want about 50 articles in a search, and then you can kind of narrow. 50 isn't too many to look through just to decide which ones you should read, and then from there which ones you should use in your paper. But 1,250 is way too many, so I need to cut down on this. If you look in the side column here, scroll down and look in the side column, you can see that there are different things you can click on to narrow your results. And so rather than typing Marvel in as a search term, I'll just see if the film itself is its own category. And sure enough, it is. So out of these 1,250 articles on Black Panther, only 188 of them deal with the film Black Panther. So first I'm going to click on that. Now you can see I only have 188, which is much better, but it's still too many, right? I want around 50 is what I said. So it doesn't have to be exactly 50, but in that ballpark. 25 to 75, there's no exact number. It's not a science, but you don't want too many or too few. So I need to narrow some more, but I'm doing much. So you can also see type of source here. And for this, you can use popular sources. You can use anything you want as long as it passes that credibility test I talked about earlier. But scholarly sources come from academic journals, and they're still going to be the best sources because they're written by experts in the field who've really done a lot of research, so the quality is still going to be better. So if you can't find any academic journal articles on your topic, that's fine. But if you do, you might as well use them. And I've got too many results. So narrowing it to 21 results here, that's going to help a lot. So I'll go ahead and click that link, Academic Journals, and help narrow it. And sure enough, I only have 21 results. So this is much better. 50 might be better, but what you want is enough that you can look through and find some pretty good things. You only need 3 articles in the paper. You probably want to at least not read, but skim or look at the abstract for 10 to 15. You don't want to just pick 3 and then go with it because they might not be the best ones. You want to look through and evaluate what the best ones are. So a search that brings back around 20 to 50 articles is good. You can read the titles of those, and you can also read something called the abstract, which is where you click on it and it gives like a 1-paragraph summary of it. So by reading the titles and the abstracts for about 20 to 50 search results, you can from there then narrow to about 10 to 15. And those 10 to 15, I'd recommend reading the first page or 2 so you get an idea of the author's argument. And from there, you can narrow it down to about 3 to 5. And those you want to read, you skim the article, maybe read the whole thing, read much more of it, and finally, kind of choose 3 for your paper. But you want to spend some time doing this. It's part of your homework for the class these next few weeks is doing this kind of research. So you want to spend a few hours searching and narrowing down until you find, the 3 to 5 best articles. You don't want to just pick 3 randomly and roll with it because you won't have a focused paper then. So my topic was race. There are a lot of issues that come up in the film Black Panther. Race is probably the most important one or most prominent one, but it's the one I'm interested in. So I could put that search term in, and I did try it, but I only got back a couple of results. They might not mention race overtly or something like that, but with only 20 results, I can just kind of scroll through the titles and find the ones that have to do with race. So that's what I'm going to do now. Now, you should probably find 10 to 15 or so and then kind of narrow from there. I'm just going to do one here for the sake of illustrating to you how to do this. So I scroll down, and around number 9, I see one titled, "I Remember You Was Conflicted, Reflections on Black Panther the African American / African divide, and scholarly positionings. So that sounds great because it's talking about African American and African. It probably has a lot to do with race. So I'm going to look at that one. And you can see a little link there that says PDF full text. That's great because that means this is a source our library subscribes to, and so as part of your tuition, you already have access to the PDF. So you can just click on, which is what I did, and here's the PDF of the article. So now I can start reading it. One thing I should point out is you're not going to get PDF full text for every single article. So I want to show you what to do if that happens. You can see right here, there's one that says, I Dream a World, Black Panther and the Remaking of Blackness. That probably has to do with race as well, since it's talking about blackness, which is a concept, an idea. I don't have time to explain it here now. But anyway, this looks like a good article, but you see it says check for full text rather than PDF full text. So if I click on it, you'll see it gives me some options here. The option you want to go with is the one I've highlighted, using interlibrary loan. Again, as part of your tuition, you have an interlibrary loan account. So you just click on that. You might have to log in with your Eastern ID, but you just click on that, and then it'll have a form with all the information already filled out. You just have to pick a date. Pick the date when you need the article by, and then click Submit Request. And in 2 or 3 days, you'll get an email from EW Library saying the article is ready, and you'll click on the link and you'll have the PDF. Another library will have scanned it and sent it to us. So this is one of the reasons why you want to do your research in advance, because there may be some really good articles, like this one seems like a really good article for my topic, that you have to request through interlibrary loan. And you, like I said, they come pretty quickly usually, but it can take 2 or 3 days or even a week sometimes, depending on the article. So that's why we're doing our research now, even though the paper's not due for a few weeks. Okay, so that's how to find a source using the library. Let me know if you have any questions, and the librarians are super helpful. So if you contact the library or go by there when you're having trouble, they'll help you out. Now I'm going to show you how to find a source using Google Scholar. This next source will be a popular source. Even though it's called Google Scholar, it's good in that it filters out a lot of the unreliable stuff that's out there if you just search on Google, but it's still not anywhere like in the ballpark of using the EW library. So it's called Google Scholar, but you can't trust it as scholarly the way you can trust the library. So you really have to apply that credibility test to these sources, which I'll do a little bit of that here, but I'll do a lot of that in the next lecture. But this is how you would search for a source for this pop culture topic using Google Scholar. You can go back to the library guide because since this is a pop culture topic and we might need to go beyond the library some, our librarian has included a link to Google Scholar, but you can also just type in scholar.google.com. So here we are. Now, because we're going to get a lot of results, you're going to get thousands and thousands of results on Google Scholar. I went ahead and used those other terms, Marvel and race, from my research question that I didn't use when I used the library, because I knew the library, it's a better search engine. I'd get results closer to my topic just by typing in one term. Here, I'm going to use more terms because I know I'm going to get thousands and thousands of results because it's Google. So 1,460 results, way too many. So even though I typed in Marvel, it's probably bringing up the comic books, but you can see there's stuff there like the Odyssey of Black Men in America from 1996. That probably doesn't talk about Marvel at all. So Google is not the best search engine, but it's one way to find stuff the library doesn't have, which is stuff we probably need for this since we're doing web articles in pop culture. So what I decided to do, I could add the word film, and I did try that, but it still didn't cut it down by that much. So I click, again, the sidebar over there. This doesn't have as many sidebars as the library, but it does have some. So I click Since 2018, and That way I know it'll be fewer results because that's just this year. And the film came out in 2018. So there probably weren't any articles on the movie Black Panther before 2018. So I know I'm kind of safe in that regard. So I click since 2018. And here you can see I only get 240 results, which is pretty good for Google. So I'm just going to start scrolling through those. And you can see there's one called The Ancestral Lands of Black Panther and Killmonger Unburied. And from reading that last article, I know that I've learned more about my topic. I was interested about race. And something I learned from reading the last article is there's this difference between African and African American. And that seemed really interesting to me. That's something, I knew about race, but like in a lot of scenarios, I might not have known that. It's kind of an interesting piece of information. So I want to pursue that further. And I know that Black Panther, the hero of the film, is African, whereas Killmonger, the villain, is African American. So since this one has the two kind of separated out in the title, and it talks about their ancestral lands, that seems like it might really relate to this kind of more specific subtopic I've become interested in. So I'm going to click on that one. Again, you should look through several of these if you search on here and not just pick one or three. So here you can see that also had the PDF link. In Google Scholar, it'll be the same. Some of them will have PDFs. Some of them won't. You can check and you can log in with your EW credentials, and if it's one our library owns, you can access it. But because it's Google Scholar, unless our library owns it, you can't request the PDF the way you can with the interlibrary loan. One thing you can do is you can copy and paste the title of it into the main search page on the EW library website. And even if it didn't come up in your search, it might just come up in that general search there, and then you could still do an interlibrary loan for it. But this one, fortunately for me, did have the PDF, so there it is. Finally, I'm just going to do a regular search on Google. Again, this is really hard to find good results, but a lot of the journals that publish web articles that we could use, like some of the ones I showed you last time, like BuzzFeed and Vulture and Flickering Myth, they won't come up even in Google Scholar because of that Scholar filter. So if I want to find stuff from the types of journals that I'm writing my paper in that genre, then I'm going to use regular Google and find one more source. Again, you don't have to do this. You can get all your sources from the library or all your sources from Google Scholar or any mixture of the three of these. But I just want to show you three different examples so that you can choose how to proceed with your own research. So here I'm going to type Black Panther and race, but then I'm going to type vulture, meaning not something to do with like a vulture in the film Black Panther, but the journal that's actually called Vulture. That's where that Halloween example from the last lecture came from. And the reason why I do that is I like Vulture. I know they've published a lot of articles on Black Panther, but the way Google works is probably going to get me articles from journals similar to Vulture, not just Vulture. So we'll see what comes. It's way too many results. So I'm just going to scroll through like the first page and see what I find. But already there's some pretty interesting stuff. There's will Black Panther change Hollywood's view of black films from Vulture itself? Black Panther should win Marvel Studios its first Oscar, also from Vulture. And then also Black Panther, a groundbreaking celebration of black culture from Vox, which, like I kind of alluded to on the last slide, is another web journal, very similar to Vulture, but a little bit different. So I was able to get some stuff doing this that didn't come up in the library or Google Scholar. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that one from Vox because it sounds like it has the most to do with race. And so here it is, and you can clearly see this is a web article with images and links, so it's much like what you'll be writing. Web articles, I should mention about web articles that they can be both popular and scholarly. There are a lot of scholarly academic journals that publish web articles. So a web article isn't necessarily popular or scholarly by its nature. It just depends on who's publishing it and who's writing it. So this is, again, where your discernment for credibility comes into play. Vox is a pretty liberal-leaning journal, which means it has kind of a bias. But like I said, I know Black Panther well. So in reading this, I was able to see it's pretty reliable. And so I decided to use it. And it matters for what your purposes are. If I were making more of a political kind of an argument, this might not be a good choice because it is kind of a liberal-leaning journal and it has kind of a bias. But for this paper, since I'm more just analyzing the film, what it's saying about the film seems pretty accurate. So I'm going to go ahead and use it in my paper. Those are the kinds of choices you have to make. But the important point is that you make those choices. You don't just pick an article and go with it. You spend a few minutes evaluating it. So now I've got my 3 sources from 3 different places. Again, you can find sources from any of these 3 places. You don't have to use all of them. You can use any combination of popular and scholarly. For the actual paper, you need 3 sources that you see are credible, and the way I just evaluated this one is credible. Beyond that, you can kind of search however and wherever you want. Just make sure they pass that credibility test. And the next lecture is going to be all about the credibility test. But hopefully what we've gone over here gives you kind of some ideas for how to do your search, those principles of research that you can use now as well as in other classes. Finally, I have a few last tips for you before we transition to the next part of the lecture. Because one issue with my example, it's part of why I picked it, but it's also an issue with it, is Black Panther was a hugely successful film. It was both popular, it made a lot of money, and it was also really well received by critics. Critics praised this film for its depiction of race. So a lot of people were writing articles about it, which made the search I just did very easy. I wanted an easy search because I can only cover so much in a lecture. I don't want to give you a 3-hour lecture. I want to give you, a 40-minute lecture. So I had to pick an easy topic. You might have a harder topic. You might have a text that not as many people have written about as Black Panther. And that's fine. That's great. You got to write about something you're passionate about. I love that. But it might be harder for you to find results. You might not find them as easily as I did. So I'm going to give you some other tips to kind of help you for searches that might not be as easy as the one I just did. So instead of searching by title, search by genre. In other words, for instance, if you're writing about a hip-hop song, maybe no one's written any scholarly articles on your hip-hop song, or even any popular ones. So you might just search for hip-hop instead of the title of the song. For instance, Marvel films have had a lot to say about race before Black Panther came out, but none of them discuss it as overtly. So if I were doing this a year and a half ago, I might have put just Marvel film plus race. And this is totally fine. You don't have to have an article that talks directly about your text. You can just have one that talks about your type of text, your genre. If you're writing about a hip-hop song, you can have an article on hip-hop. If you're writing about a Marvel film, you can have an article that talks about Marvel in general. The reason for this, and this is important, this goes back to what we learned about synthesis, is the articles don't make your argument for you. You synthesize the articles to show how your argument is unique, but ultimately you have your own unique argument. So if they just talk about your topic more generally, but still relate, that's okay. You don't have to have an article on Iron Man if you're writing about Iron Man. You can have an article on Marvel. You can have an article on whatever cultural issue it is you're talking about. So just keep that in mind. Last tip is when I was in the library database earlier, I eliminated the popular sources and just kept the scholarly ones because there were 20 scholarly sources on Black Panther, and that's a lot. Again, scholars and academics loved Black Panther because of its positive portrayals of race. So you might not have a text that's celebrated as much by scholars. So you can find popular sources using the library, and that's fine. You don't have to eliminate those from your search the way I did. So just some other tips to help you find your sources if my suggestions here aren't working or you have an example that's more difficult than Black Panther. And again, you can email me, and I also really, even more so, highly recommend contacting the librarian and the librarians. They can help you. All right, so there's one final piece here, which is making the transition from researching your topic to formulating an argument about it. You don't necessarily have to have your argument this week. This week, you're just doing the research. But by the time you go to write the paper, you need to have an argument. So I wanted to give you an example here to show you how you can go about this. And so I've got kind of my topic, as I've learned more about it from doing the research, is about the differences between T'Challa, who's the Black Panther, and Killmonger, who wants to be the Black Panther. So I've got this image showing the two of them separated here. All right, so kind of restating the research process, reminding us in case we forgot. State your topic as a question, turn your question into a position, narrow your position, qualify your thesis. The 3 and 4 can come when you go to do the paper. Right now I'm going to work on 1 and 2 here, specifically moving from 1 to 2. So first, I'm going to synthesize the sources. So I'll do a quick summary of each source. What was source 1 about? It was really about the differences between African and African American cultures, which is a subtle but important distinction, right? People who are from Africa, or their ancestors were from Africa but who are American citizens, and then people who actually live in Africa. That's an important distinction, and that film explores that distinction. So that's what the first article talked about. The second one was similar, but it talked about more specific characters. The African character T'Challa and the African American character Killmonger. So it talks about their different backgrounds and upbringings, and doesn't fully explore, but hints at the idea that T'Challa is a prince who becomes a king. So he's from Africa, and he comes from a position of privilege, which isn't true for everyone who's from Africa, obviously, but it's true in the kind of fictional world, the fictional African country of Wakanda that Marvel has made up for the movie. Whereas Killmonger grew up in Oakland, California, and he grew up in poverty. His mom was a single mom because his dad dies early on in the film, in the opening scene. If you've seen it, you know that. And they didn't have much money. So one character, one from Africa, has all of this privilege, and the one from the U.S. Grew up in poverty. Now, those distinctions aren't always true. There's kind of an exception. Because the film has this fictional African country that's very powerful. So we shouldn't take these as general conclusions, but they're true for the characters in this movie. And that's something interesting the second article touches on, but doesn't fully explore. Finally, the third one, the summary of it is in the title. It's a gorgeous, groundbreaking celebration of Black culture, which it is. This is why critics have praised the movie. So that's definitely something I learned about race with it. So now I want to synthesize these. And this is what I would do. This is what I would recommend you do when you do your research, because you're coming out of that synthesis unit we did, where you synthesize those sources on technology. And the key to that paper was synthesizing those sources, then coming up with your own unique argument. So my hope, my goal, my dream here is that you'll take those skills and apply them to this unit as well. So rather than just kind of quoting your sources or using them to back up what you say, really synthesizing them, seeing what has already been said about this work, in this case a film, whatever it is you're writing about, what can I say? What can I add to that conversation? So summarize each source like this and then synthesize them. What do they have in common? What can you add to that conversation? So here's what I came up with. They all talk about these positive portrayals of race. What that third article says is true for all three of these. But the second one touches on class distinctions, and so does the first one, which is interesting, but they don't fully explore it. Class is kind of a different but related, is different from race, but it's related to race. And so that's a really interesting topic to me that I hadn't thought of when I started my search. I thought the film was all about race, but it ends up also being about class, because one character comes from a background of privilege, and the other character comes from a background of poverty. It's true, and I did think of it, but it didn't really stand out to me till I did this research. So pick a text you're passionate about, but Be willing to learn more about it. We call that writing as inquiry. Be willing to kind of learn more about the thing you're researching as you do the research. So I learned that the film Black Panther also has a lot to say about class, not just race. The two are connected, but class is this other important topic. But none of these articles really go into detail on it. They kind of just mention it. So that seems like a fruitful area for me to explore. That's something I could write about in my paper. That's where I could, if I go into full on talking about class, since these are just kind of barely mentioning it, then I could have a really unique argument. So that's how you do the research, synthesize the sources, and finally turn your question into a position so that you have a thesis. And so here we go, last slide. Turn your question into a position. I started with what does the film Black Panther have to say about race? I learned it as positive portrayals of race, but it also touches on class. I want to explore that more. Once I thought about it some, I came up with my thesis, and here's my thesis. While Black Panther provides a glorious celebration of Black culture, it fails to fully explore the class tension as it presents and ultimately resorts to portraying stereotypes of class differences when the hero comes from a background of privilege and the villain a background of poverty. So it's this glorious celebration of Black culture. That's true, and that's a wonderful positive thing. But it's kind of cliche. It's kind of generic for the hero to be, a king and the villain to come from this poor background. Those are some pretty old stereotypes that aren't really positive stereotypes. So it could have said much more about class than it does. And it does say some, because it talks about, the kingdom going throughout the world to help impoverished people. And that's kind of the main crisis in the movie. They have different philosophical views about how to help people. But this isn't fully explored. It's not explored to the extent that race is. And so that's a really interesting thing. So it's just one example of how to do the research, synthesize the sources, and then figure out the unique thing you can add. So that's my thesis on Black Panther. It's a movie I love. It'd be fun to write about. Hopefully you can do something similar with your own text that you're interested in. So I really look forward to seeing what you come up with when you read the papers. As you're doing the research, feel free to ask me questions or the librarian questions, and feel free to send me your thesis once you have a thesis. Again, we're 2 weeks away from the rough draft, but be thinking about what you want to argue as you're looking at these sources and learning more about the topic, like I did when I researched Black Panther. So anyway, have a great day, and thank you for listening to the lecture.